Sandra is going to show you how to ask a question.
If during the meeting you do have a question, would like to ask one, click on the man at the top here, on left click, sorry, on the arrow, and just say, raise your hand. His hand is raised, so I'm just going to shut that off. So just click on the arrow and on raised hand, and your name will appear at the top, like Joanne McLaren has.
Joanne, do you have a question?
Oh, it's 2 raised hands.
No, I'm good, thanks.
I think people may have just been testing
Okay,
it.
so that's how you ask a question, and then we'll call out your name, and then you can ask your question. So I will turn it over to Mike Villeneuve, CNA's CEO.
Thanks, Debbie, and good afternoon, everybody. We've got people joining the webinar from across the country today, so thank you so much for joining and for your interest and for taking the time to be online with us. As Debbie said, I'm Mike Villeneuve, and I'm the CEO here at CNA, and as I say every time I have the chance, it's the best job I ever had in my life, and I just love it, so I'm very honored to be in the role. Our discussion today is to focus on proposed changes to CNA's membership structure coming up, and we'll talk about the why, the how, what it means, and the next steps. If this sounds a little bit like I'm reading something at points, I am. So we do have a script to follow just so that we make sure that we give you all the right information and not forget things, but I'll try not to sound like we're just reading. So here with me on the webinar is our lawyer, Megan Wallace. Do you want to say hi, Megan?
Hello, thank you for having me.
She's real. She's been guiding us through the detailed work of proposing amendments to the articles and bylaws, and our CNA President-elect, Claire Betker, will join us after about 1 o'clock. Claire was originally to be your host, but she's currently hosting another CNA webinar, which we missed that we had 2 going on at once, and hers is on public health leadership. So she'll be on in about half an hour if you have questions specifically for the President-elect. We scheduled an hour together. We didn't use an hour yesterday or 2 days ago, I guess, when we had the first one, but we have an hour set aside and time for me to provide an overview, and take some questions. And probably what I'll do is stop every once in a while at the end of sections and see if there's questions in, so you don't have to wait right till the very end, but we will have a question period at the end. There's no PowerPoint, so don't be waiting for the screen to change. It's really just a placeholder. And we are recording the session for those, we are recording this one too, for those who couldn't attend today or who might want clarifications later, and they'll be up in the next day or 2. So, excuse me. First, let me note that the work I'm about to share with you has been led by the Board of Directors and the Board's Governance and Leadership Committee. So I want to thank them for their very thoughtful deliberations, and when we say if things were discussed at a November meeting, you know, behind that is many, many weeks of work, as many of you will know. And the intention of these webinars is to educate voting delegates, members and nurses across Canada about the proposed changes to the membership structure. The specific proposal is a plan to expand membership beyond RNs and nurse practitioners. And from here on, I'm just going to say RNs because, of course, nurse practitioners have to be RNs. And so the proposal is to expand the membership by changing the structure to include registered psychiatric nurses and licensed or registered practical nurses in the association. Since our beginnings in 1908, CNA has been the national professional voice of RNs, although, as I often say, since in our actual beginning, there were no RNs, there was just nurse, and that it became RNs over the first 20 to 25 years of the association's history, but we really have by default become the home of registered nurses in that time, and now we're looking at is it reasonable now to represent all nurses. So by that we mean all the regulated nursing designations that exist in Canada, so not unregulated care assistants, for example. So again, just to reiterate, it's registered nurses, nurse practitioners, and they work in all 13 jurisdictions, those 2 categories. Registered psychiatric nurses, which are educated and licensed in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and the Yukon. And practical nurses, excuse me, which are RPNs, registered practical nurses in Ontario, and licensed practical nurses everywhere else in the country. And the proposal to change the membership will be brought forward to voting delegates at the June 18th annual general meeting. So I'm going to proceed with just a little bit more background material. Excuse me, I'm sipping water. Changes in several provinces, as well as a real need for and benefit of collaboration within and among nursing have been catalysts for this decision to propose the changes. But there has been an important decision in British Columbia to unite the 4 regulated nursing categories under the one new regulatory body, the BC College of Nursing Professionals. At the same time, the new association called the Nurses and Nurse Practitioners of British Columbia, an NPBC, has formed as a single nursing organization that will represent all the nurses in BC, meaning LPNs, RPNs, registered nurses, and nurse practitioners. This professional association will ensure that every nursing category has an equal voice on nursing issues because of their governance structure, and support them to work together for the health and well-being of people in BC. So the challenge for us here at CNA is that our current British Columbia jurisdictional member, which is called the Association of Registered Nurses of BC, ARNBC, which is an association of RNs, as you can tell by the name, won't exist anymore. And the new association that would be the replacement or the new jurisdictional member, the new NNPBC, excuse me, has members in it who are not registered nurses. So it comes into a fundamental conflict with CNA's bylaws, which say that you have to be a registered nurse to be a member. So that, in a sense, has forced the conversation on that front, which is important. And some of you will know we've had the conversation before, right? We've gone through this as an organization several years ago. So while BC as a context, is part of the catalyst for the conversation right now, the issue is long-standing, and the fragmentation across nursing is another strong motivating factor. These kinds of changes are also being contemplated or have taken place in other jurisdictions, and the next in the list for us that affects CNA is Nova Scotia and their change to a merged college of LPNs and RNs. We know that we have evidence that a lack of unity and collaboration within nursing has had negative implications at the practice organizational systems levels, and we see this current context as a really exciting but also strategic opportunity to bring nurses' voices together within a united national professional association. So before I talk about the actual mechanics of the changes, let me just stop for a second and see if there's any questions at this point. And for anyone who joined after we started, it's Mike Villeneuve speaking. I'm the CEO at CNA. So I'm just looking to...
It would show up. There's no questions.
No questions right now? Okay, so we'll keep going. But we've got a whole team here watching for hands going up, so don't be shy. Okay, so the proposal to change the membership structure, let me tell you about that. I've already said the existing membership structure would change to include LPNs and all categories of practical nurses, or all titles I should say, and registered psychiatric nurses. So to implement this change, CNA's members will need to approve 2 issues. First is changes to the Articles of Continuance, and second, changes to the bylaws. Both of these documents contain the same language regarding the structure, and both will need to be amended at the AGM in June 2018. So let me provide a high-level overview of the key amendments to the bylaws. First is to broaden the wording so that the term registered nurses is not the only nursing designation referred to throughout the bylaws. So wherever it used to say registered nurse, the word is revised to nurse, excuse me, or nurses. Broadening the wording so that a student body does not only refer to a body that represents nursing students enrolled in educational programs for entry to practice as an RN. The wording is revised to nursing students enrolled in educational programs for entry to practice as a nurse. And third, adjusting the names of the membership classes. So bear with me because we've all struggled through the years with what the classes are. So currently the member classes are called Class A, B, C, or D, and they're followed by a descriptive name. So for example, we would say the Class D members, the family of nursing. And the system of using both the class designation and the name for each class has been identified by us, but also by many of you, as confusing and not really helpful. So given that feedback, the proposed change is really just to simplify the wording. Includes removal of the class designation, and going forward we would only use the descriptive terms. So for example, where we used to say Class A members, Class A jurisdictional members, it would just say jurisdictional members. So there's no substantive change to this. It just takes those A, B, C, D classes out and just leaves the description. Doesn't change any of the rights or obligations of the members, just simplifies the terms. Because all the proposed amendments are fundamental changes within the meaning of the Canada Not-for-Profit Corporations Act, they have to be approved by what is called a special resolution, which is 2/3 of the voting members at a meeting of the members, which is what we're talking about for June 18th. And if you look at Appendix A of your package, you'll see every proposed change to the bylaws is there indicated in color. So maybe I'll just do the members' involvement and then stop again. Will that make sense? So in terms of involvement, these changes are supported and driven by the Board of Directors. Let me tell you a little bit about that. After a substantive discussion through the fall, the proposal to expand the CNA membership was discussed at the November 2017 Board of Directors meeting. And at that meeting, the board unanimously approved a motion to bring this forward to voting delegates at the June 18th annual meeting of members. We've been consulting members and stakeholders since then on the proposal. I can say that at the March board meeting where we had all the language changes and legal changes, it was again unanimously agreed to continue to go forward through with this recommended change. We've had an online opinion survey. We've done presentations and discussions at meetings and conferences across the country. Some of you, of course, I would have met at those, and some of you may have, in fact, spoken about it for us, because I can see some of our own board people on the call. And we certainly got many ideas, pieces of advice, and so on. So far, I would say that responses to the opinion survey, and in fact responses in general, seem to indicate that I would say the majority by far of nurses seem to be landing on the idea that a united professional nursing association is overdue. However, we have had some, of course, pushback and some concerns expressed. So I'm going to share what those are in a minute, but just so we don't go too far along, if you have questions about any of those logistics, is there anything at this point? We're watching the screen here. I think a hand went up. Or no, it's a little telephone.
Somebody just joined.
Okay. All right, so let's keep going, and we'll just stop, and we'll take questions if they come up. So the concerns seem to fall into roughly 4 theme areas. So let me answer those. Let me address those in the theme areas that we've identified. So the first concern is that the distinct voice of each nursing group could be lost under one national association, or the recommendation is that we have to do something to make sure that doesn't happen. So if the vote on the membership expansion is passed at the annual meeting in June, it means it would be possible for regulated nurses to become members. It doesn't say anything about how they would, or how you would join, what the fees would be, and all that sort of thing. So I should be clear up front that this is just, is it even possible for someone who's not an RN to join? So determining the membership model is the next really important step. We will undertake a governance review in the fall. We're going to do that regardless, but it will be particularly important in the wake of this decision, if it's passed, to develop and evaluate the structures that need to be put in place to be inclusive of both the unique and collective needs of the different regulated nursing groups. So what special programs do LPNs and RNs need that are different from one another, for example, and what do they need that may be the same. And one example, and I think this is sort of the structure in BC, but someone may correct me, maybe to create advisory councils for each regulated category, so you hear a strong representation of all the viewpoints with an equitable governing structure, ensuring that each group is fully included. And just to be very clear, the issue is if governance structures remain the way they often are, the 320,000 RNs would always bowl everybody else over, right? Or the LPNs would bowl over the RPNs. So part of the governance review is how do you bring some equity to that so that the voices, one group doesn't always win just by virtue of its size. It's always a problem in federations too, right? That's why we have a Senate, to bring some equity to the inequity of the size of the country. So part of the governance review, as part of the governance review, each of the different categories of nurses will be engaged to ensure their needs are identified and to solicit ideas about the best ways to support them. A unified structure would allow us to focus on each of those member categories and then tailor some specific projects and advocacy for that group, while when we need it, having the power of potentially the whole 420,000 across the country, when we need that strong collective voice that says, Canadian nursing thinks this. One example of a structure sort of like this is the Royal College of Nursing in the United Kingdom, which identifies itself as speaking for all categories from, essentially they would say from PSW to PhD, but I think they call them care assistants to, doctorally prepared nurses, and they just say we're the voice of everyone who does that nursing care. So they have very unique programs within their structure for different groups, but as you know, on the global stage, they have great strength in their collective unity. Second concern, I'm just looking at the screen, is the proposed expansion essentially about just securing new revenue? So a couple of thoughts. First of all, no, it's not just about that, because CNA doesn't do things just to get money. We are a not-for-profit with an ethical lens to the kind of business we do. However, CNA is a business, it's not a club, and CNA does need sources of revenue, so we have to think about the sustainability, how we support the work to advance nursing and health, provide the kinds of programs and services members want, and as CNA has shrunk in size considerably over the last 5 to 6 years, the demand has not decreased, right? So we need to think about how do you logically sustain and grow an organization when some of the sources of revenue are smaller. So we're, of course, having more members would provide some strength and help us see efficiencies, and we see that collaboration is one that would help us. By creating a strong national inclusive nursing body, we do believe we'd have a stronger advocacy voice around a sustainable health system, and of course the issues we advocate for around health and, the health of Canadians and people living in Canada. So while no, it's not just for the money, it is partly, of course, because we have to find ethical lines of revenue, and we have people knocking on the door, sometimes saying they want to join. The brand is valued, and it's important to hear that, right? When people want to join you, there's usually bears listening to. Third concern was how can we consider bringing all nurses under one association when some people believe that RN positions are being filled by nurses in other categories, either in an unethical or not in the right way. So let me be clear, as we've said always, CNA has always said that we believe Canadians deserve the right provider, providing the right care, delivered at the right time and for the right cost. We've always opposed, as we do now and will continue to do, the practice of employers replacing care providers based only on saving money, and we will continue to hold that position. Our view is it's our duty to deliver evidence and advice to governments, and we do this every single day, it seems, as well as to employers and Canadians about how to safely deploy the right number and mix of nurses, and in what circumstances a specific category of nurse would be warranted. And as I have said across the country when I've been doing talks about this, the current model hasn't prevented this, right? So it may be advantageous, to be in a different model that may allow us to address this issue, at least from a different vantage point. But the old model, the current one, didn't stop this either. Did someone want to say something? Can you tell? Sorry, colleagues, at this end we heard a voice. Concern number 4, I guess this is the last one, is will these membership changes impact the salaries, pensions, hours, scope of practice, and so on of the regulated categories? The proposed amendments to the bylaws and articles do not touch at all on socioeconomic areas of nursing, such as pay, vacation time, and so on. As you know, scopes of practice are set out in provincial and territorial legislation and regulations, and they're not affected in any way by proposed changes at CNA. CNA is purely a professional association at the national level within a federation, so our role is quite remote from those kinds of changes, and the focus is to become the professional voice of Canadian nursing, which has always been the mandate, right, to advance the profession, and to do so having all the people in the House who make up the profession. The fifth concern, this came up in Tuesday during the first webinar, are other regulated groups aware and on board with these changes? So yes, we've shared this with other groups across the country for sure, and you know, the place that would have, I suppose, the most depth of experience talking about it would be BC, because they spent 2 or 3 years going through their own. Joy's on the phone. Joy could probably comment on it. Joy Peacock was their CEO. Through some very painful dialogues themselves around what does it mean to be an emerged association. So yes, people are aware across the country. I had the chance to talk to many groups, including one meeting with the 4 regulatory bodies for registered psychiatric nurses, as well as individual meetings. There is no national association for for registered psychiatric nurses. They come together as a group of 4 regulators under, in a sense, they act like not act in a bad way, but they function as a national group, but with a largely regulatory function. So it's not like they have an equivalent of CNA. The licensed practical nurses have had a national professional association on and off through the years that has come and gone from a very large association with 8 or 9 jurisdictions members to times when it's quite small, which it is now. So currently, for example, the National Licensed Practical Nurses Group, and I'm forgetting the exact title, has just a very small number of members who are in British Columbia. The Registered Practical Nurses Association of Ontario, which has 12 or 14,000 members, large group, is not a part of that national group. So it's the only really big professional association for registered practical nurses. I'm getting tired with I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong terms. Licensed practical nurses, and Diane Marchand, who's their CEO, has been in close contact with me as we've talked about this and what would this mean for those kinds of associations and so on. Many people want to join. Many practical nurses have asked for years to have some of the services of CNA, including the right to write specialty certification exams developed for practical nurses. But they're also being cautious, and I haven't hidden this as I've talked across the country. Some folks have said, you wouldn't let us join for 50 years, so you're going to have to eat a little crow, and just sort of lure us in over the next year or two. So we understand that the how you join is going to be an important next step. But I think that it's an important signal, I said earlier, that there is an interest in CNA programs, services, affinity programs, the specialty certification, and so on. And in fact, this year, I can't remember if it'll happen in November of this year or if it's early next year, the first exam for licensed practical nurses will be administered, and it's in gerontology. And again, you know, the intention of CNA, remember, is to raise the profession. So we want to raise all the boats in a sense, not just the RN boat. So I think the feeling across the country from myself, personally having done a lot of travel, as well as our surveys and so on, is that things are generally positive, but people want us to be cautious, which we will. So before I speak to the next steps, I'll just stop again for a second.
Joy Peacock, do you want to take the floor?
I heard my name. I just, this last item that you just discussed, Mike, is quite a strong memory for me in my prior role and the work that I did in British Columbia and the people I spoke to across the country. I think if I was to sort of summarize my thinking about what I've heard is there is, I think, as you said, a strong desire for this to happen, but it's the first step after many years of people who felt they wanted to be part of something and weren't able to or weren't allowed to or were afraid to or whatever the word is. And so I think from my experience, again, in British Columbia, people want to be at the table, they want to be partners, but they want to be full partners, not a subgroup or part of something else. That's just what I've heard, and I think there is cautious optimism around this and a reason to do all the due diligence that you're doing. But I think it's also, personally, I think it's the right thing to do. And I think professionally, it's the right thing to do. And I won't say anything more, but I just wanted to say something because I did hear my name. And I usually talk if I hear my name.
Thank you.
Whether I should or not.
Thank you very much, Joy. And that is sort of what I heard too, Joy, you know, that people want to move but want us to be careful and cautious. I don't see any other, right? No. One of you is nodding yes and one of you is nodding no. Okay, I'm going to just wrap up and then we'll open it for other questions. So, in terms of next steps, the proposed amendments to the articles and bylaws will be presented at the AGM on June 18th. Voting delegates will be asked to vote on the proposed changes to the barticles, the bylaws and the changes to the articles. As with any proposed amendments, there's time allotted for voting delegates and members who are not voting delegates to ask questions and discuss the changes. A 2/3 majority is required to pass this vote. And as I said earlier, but just to reiterate it, this proposal is the first necessary step, which is, in a sense, the foundation that says, can people join who aren't RNs? Nothing about how, what class, what structure. But I think, Joy, your comment is important because I think we have had some groups that are under what's called family of nursing under Class D, which is often, D is not a subclass of A, it's just a different class, but it has different rights around voting and so on than the full Class A. And the intention here is that if the vote is passed, everyone will have equity in the sense of what class they're in. We're not going to use that term anymore, but I hope you guys know what I mean. So it's not that you get to come in, but you sit at the kids' table. During the governance review in the fall, we'll evaluate the structures we have to put in place to be inclusive of the unique and collective needs. Between now and the AGM, I invite you to read again through the package, as well as if you look at the Canadian Nurse for the last 2 issues and the current one just about to come to you, maybe 10 days or 2 weeks just before the AGM, you'll see a substantial discussion, these issues also written out, you know, what were the concerns we heard, and so on. For any of you who are on the webinar who are voting delegates, I want to remind you that there's webinars coming in June specifically for you to outline the roles and responsibilities. They are June 5th and 11th. So we're not going to talk about those issues today, largely because I have no content knowledge, and those of you who know me know that I often don't. Let me just before we close, then let me just throw it open again to questions or discussion at this point. Well, actually, why don't I just make my closing comments, and then I'll throw it open. So just in case anyone's interested, there is a French webinar, the very same as this, tomorrow from 12 to 1 if you speak French or would like to refer someone. Again, the voting delegates, remember June 5th or 11th, please join one of those so that there's no confusion on the day of. And in closing, I would say that no matter what my view, because I haven't hit it, is I hope that the vote goes. But regardless of the outcome of the vote, we will continue the work to represent the members, which will be registered nurses, and of course to advocate for the larger profession and for our members. So don't be worried about that. We will keep moving forward. So with that, I'll say I'll stop now and just see if we have any questions for me or any of the team here, or Megan, who's our lawyer.
So Karen Fornet.
Hi, Mike. Thank you. That was very well explained, and I'm glad that you stressed the point that all of these groups will not lose their identity in this structure. It's how we're going to operationalize the plan as on a move forward that will really provide the direction. But thank you. Very well explained.
Thanks very much, Karen. Colleagues, please don't be intimidated or whatever if you'd like to speak up, or if there's anything you didn't understand or don't agree with, it's okay to say it. We're watching the screen. How about here? Anybody? Megan, do you have anything you want? Megan's our lawyer, just to remind you. Megan, anything you wanted to add to?
No, I think you've covered off everything very nicely.
And anybody else? So I'm just going to wait another 30 seconds in case anyone is contemplating, and then we'll go offline, but you all know how to reach us, I think, and you can always find me through the website if you can't find anybody else. Oh,
Joanne McLaren.
Hi there. Thanks for the presentation, and I just wanted to get a sense, if you have a sense, since you've posted this information around the proposed membership changes, kind of what's the sense you're getting? So I saw through the Canadian Nurse article that you wrote that there was some positive feedback there. Just wondering what are you getting in terms of a general sense of the feeling across Canada about this change?
My sense from my travels, Joanne, is that it's been pretty positive, and I think positive in the sense that I think nurses in all categories mostly seem to think it's probably the right thing to do. I mean, lots of other associations do it, and if you go to the International Council of Nurses, it's made up of all kinds of associations that are made up of all the nurses in their country. I think the only issue really that not the only issue, you heard a number of the concerns, but the main caveat, I guess, when I hear that is just be careful so that you don't lose, what's the best step that CNA has done? Don't lose the great representation of RNs or the great advocacy work or whatever. So I think we would proceed quite carefully, but I have a pretty strong sense that seems to be a pretty good feeling about it. Are you hearing anything yourself, Joanne?
Well, I'm from BC, so definitely, we are moving forward as you said, and I think in general people are quite excited and welcoming of this unity.
Yeah, you're in the heart of it. You're probably more educated than other parts of the country. People don't sort of look like they don't know what I'm talking about because they're not tuned into it at all. You get every possible reaction, but among the people who are more active, in the specialty groups and so on, I think, I don't know, I've spoken with all the specialty groups, or nearly all of the 46 since I took the job, and we've talked about it in every call, talked about it with our jurisdictional members, and I think I'm not taking bets on the vote. I just sense that there's a forward motion that this is probably the time to do this. We did the vote before. It was 2013, I think, and it was defeated, but narrowly. It wasn't a 90-10. It was a 60-40 or something, So I think people kind of thought then they were getting close. So if you're looking for a number, we have to have 66%, but we haven't polled it that way at all. We've just been listening to what people's concerns were. It was interesting to me, Joanne, though, that a couple of people who commented for the Journal in favor were people who I think 5 years ago would have said no. So that was an interesting barometer to me, that maybe there's a shift in how we view what a professional association should be at a national level in a federation, because this doesn't replace any of the provincial bodies that already exist. Anyway, Joanne, I don't know if that helps, but that's sort of my vague observation after a lot of travel this year.
That's great, thank you.
I don't see any other hands up, so I will say thank you to all of you for making the time. Thank you, Megan, for coming. Thanks to all my team around here. There's a whole pile of people around the room ready to answer questions. And I will turn it back to, are one of you going to sign off or do I? Okay, so I think we don't have to do anything else formal. So colleagues, if there's no further questions, we're all going to sign off now. Thank you very much, and please email if you need any further help or have any other questions, okay? Thank you. Bye.